Sorry, are you reading fiction? The college girl smirked. The whole room burst into laughter. The silver-haired old woman merely eased the leather journal closed. No one saw her hand trembling. No one knew the blood stain on the cover had dried since Fallujah 2004. There, she had pulled 15 people out of a firestorm. But here, she was just an old lady telling war stories. Until a former Navy SEAL walked in, looked at the notebook, then came to attention and saluted. And the entire room fell silent. Norfolk, Virginia. This damp, sea-wind port city is no stranger to uniforms. Footsteps that once pressed into deck plating now settle quietly onto the library's wooden floor. Among them, a silver-haired woman who comes every morning, dusts books, reorders military files, as if memory too needs to be shelved row by row. Eleanor Monroe, Ellie, came here in the winter of 1981, after her first tour at Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth. A Navy nurse, not conspicuous, disinclined to speak about herself. She moved through life as if the past were a breeze, unseen, yet always present. In the official record, Ellie is a dedicated service member, honorably retired in 2006. That's all. Nothing else. No mention of Fallujah. No word of phantom fury. Not a single line about the fiercest urban battle America had fought since Hugh, 1968. The leather journal she always carries, some think it's a medication schedule, others guess it's poetry, is in fact a log of every shift, every blast, every name. Ink blurred by sweat, some pages still stained with blood. She has never washed it. It is not a book for others to read, but a silent proof that it happened, and that those who remained behind were not imagined. Autumn 2004, Ellie was assigned to Iraq for Operation Phantom Fury. In Fallujah, her task was ground support for Bravo 27. 6 days and nights under shelling. 6 days she never removed her armor, never slept a full stretch. She crawled through a market alley under sniper fire, hauling a med bag weighing nearly 30 pounds. When needed, she tore cloth from her shirt for bandages, pulled out bootlaces to make tourniquets. A wounded private remembered, "I thought it was an angel." Then I saw her hands were black, with smoke and oil. The unit called her Echo Juliet 12, ground lead nurse call sign. She was the last to withdraw from the Western residential block after the Marines had been evacuated and the demolition order on the entire sector was pending approval. She saved 15 people. 2 of them later became military physicians. The scar along her right flank is the trace of shrapnel, earned while she covered a soldier not yet old enough to drink legally. It has never been a medal, never appeared in a speech. But each morning, when she pulls up the zipper of her worn cardigan, she still feels its dull presence, a wordless reminder. I am still here. They are not. Ellie does not tell stories. She does not stand on stages, does not receive citations. When she returned, they handed her a thick envelope. Inside, retirement papers and one cold annotation. Mission classified. Not for release. Full stop. No after-action report. No flag presentation. No one asked, "Are you all right?" She went back to the library. Not because she loves books, but because there, people do not ask about the past. Each afternoon she straightens war memoirs, hand notes positions on old battle maps, labels clearly by area of operation. No one notices why an elderly woman with a dust cloth knows the exact coordinates of the Najaf sector, or why she always locks the Fallujah map in a separate drawer. Beneath the thin sweater, the scar remains. Beneath the quiet, memory still burns. But Ellie does not need belief. She only needs someone, at some point, to understand that not every war ends with the last gunshot. Some wars are quieter. The war to keep memory alive. And sometimes, the most painful thing is having to pretend you were never there.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
That morning, Ellie came to the library earlier than usual. She brought the old journal, carefully wrapped in a wax paper-lined cloth bag. Not because it was precious, but because the ink had faded, and the middle pages had once absorbed dried blood. She opened it at her personal reading desk, stopping at the passage marked by a sand-colored cotton scrap, a cut from a soldier's shirt folded small. Today's community reading program theme, Women in Military History. Ellie had not registered, but a young librarian knew she had served, so invited her as a gesture of acknowledgement. She had declined 3 times. The 4th, she nodded, not because she wanted to speak, but because a part of her knew, if no one tells it, memory will fall away like rotting leaves. When the first 2 presenters finished, the room still held a polite, temperate air. A story about a great-grandmother who wrote letters to soldiers. Then a slideshow of women providing home front support. The audience nodded, occasionally jotting notes. When her name was announced, a few people turned, watching her figure walk slowly to the lectern. No projected materials, no photo boards. Just a gaunt woman, arms holding an old book, as though keeping something from slipping away. Ellie did not introduce herself. She opened the book, inhaled as if reclaiming part of an old breath. Her voice was husky, not loud, but each word precise. November 14th, 2004, Fallujah. Bravo team pinned in the western residential zone. I crawled across a shell crater to get the litter down. First kid had only 1 leg left. The atmosphere in the room began to shift, not from emotion, from doubt. A small laugh popped from the back. Then a line, loud enough for all to hear. You think you're some female Rambo? A few more snickers. A young woman muttered, thought this was real history reading, not fan fiction. Ellie paused. She closed the book. Her eyes did not look at anyone. Only her thin hand rested lightly on the leather cover, holding in place something this room had never understood. She returned to her seat. No rebuttal, no anger. For years she had been accustomed to silence, but this silence was different. It had weight. It pressed her shoulders down, not from age, but because a part of memory had just been torn away by the superficiality of a later generation. The journal pages held no value in that room anymore. To them, it was only an old woman murmuring past things. No one knew that the passage Ellie read was the moment she dragged a young soldier out of a fire zone while blood from his leg jetted like a hose. No one knew her hand held a pulse until the helicopter arrived. 3 hours. And no one knew that soldier lived 10 more years, long enough to become father to 3 children, before dying from the traumatic brain injury left from the war. The story had no artillery salute, no slow-motion film, only a woman unlisted in reports. No newspaper photo, no ribboned medals on her chest. Yet each of her actions stitched life back together in fading instants. The contempt she had just received was nothing new, but it still cut as deep, because no one laughed, thinking she was lying. They laughed because they did not believe war could be that real. They laughed because their present lives were too sanitized to imagine the smell of smoke, the taste of blood, or the truth that someone once died keeping a medical oath. Ellie sat there, hand still on the book. Within her, the names of every person she had once called over the radio still resonated. A child might think she was lying, but those names, they will never have the chance to refute. And if tomorrow no one remembers, who will hold the fragment of memory not permitted to disappear? Dear friends, I have a small favor to ask you. Please hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you love inspirational stories, and don't forget to leave a comment telling me, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I always find it wonderful to see the whole world gathering together just to share a meaningful moment. Graham Thorne no longer wore a uniform, but in the way he walked, in the slight change of his breathing when the word Fallujah sounded over the library speakers, one could sense a part of the past had never left him. He was upstairs, reorganizing old files in the military section, when the husky voice below made him halt. Not the words, not the story, but the way the woman spoke about November 14th, as someone who had lived inside that moment, not through books, not through retelling. Only someone who had been there could strike the tempo of time that precisely. He descended, not out of curiosity, but because he felt pulled by something familiar. The room was nearly cleared out, only a few people scattered, gathering their things, and she, the small woman with the leather book in her hand, was quietly stepping down from the reading platform. He recognized the marking on the book before he could remember her name. A small incised sign, indistinct, but one that had appeared in a report he had kept for years. Just an abraded patch of leather at the far corner of an internal map, accompanied by the medical call sign Echo Juliet 12. When he approached, no introduction, no verification were needed. Only one question sprang from the portion of memory that had never slept. Were you ever Echo Juliet 12? She did not nod, did not answer immediately. She only looked at him. Those eyes had once looked through smoke-fogged goggles, had once tracked trembling bodies in a burning night. They had not changed, despite the passage of time. "You were at Blue Ridge, Southwest Sector?" she asked. He nodded. Nothing more was necessary. In his mind, the third night in Fallujah reappeared. His unit lost contact, radio signals severed. A casualty code repeated over and over. 12 Alpha, urgent, West residential. No one knew who was broadcasting. Still less did anyone understand why that person was alive, inside a zone marked as beyond hope. Then, he had thought the broadcaster was a lone special operator. No one thought of a nurse. He took the journal from her hand. She let him read. No hindrance, no explanation. When he turned to the third page, his eyes stopped at a slanted handwritten passage. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. This exact passage he had read in the encrypted tactical report. a line whose origin no one could decode. But the script, the line spacing, the habit of slanting the initial H, all lined up, too precisely to be coincidence. He left the library that very afternoon carrying a copy of the excerpt and the unit designation. Called the Pentagon Archival Division. Supplied coordinates, time code, area of operations. The person on the other end went silent for a few seconds. Then they promised a response within 60 minutes. He waited at his desk. His hand kept touching the final fold of the journal page. The feeling was like pressing on a wound that had scarred over, but had never fully healed. Exactly 58 minutes later, the file arrived. 3 pages. Inside was a report noting an unidentified battlefield nurse attached to Bravo 27, who saved 15 soldiers over 72 continuous hours. Name unconfirmed. Medal of Honor recommendation suspended due to lack of matching personal data. One final line made his heart sink. Record classified due to administrative identity mismatch. Transferred to non-disclosed archive. He printed the file, quietly folded it, placed it into a thick brown envelope. When he handed it back to Ellie, he said nothing. But in his eyes was an affirmation that required no language. A fragment of history once buried had just been pried open, not by a system, but by a gaze held long enough to remember. There are markings not printed on paper, yet engraved forever in the memory of those who were saved. 3 days later, Ellie received an invitation sheet placed in a white envelope with no sender name. Bold print. Special event, tribute to the unnamed. Norfolk Library was the venue. No further explanation. She held the card a long while. In recent years, invitations usually arrived as emails or stopped arriving altogether. But this envelope, her hand received it as if it carried something that did not belong to the present, but was an echo from something buried too long. She arrived on time. The cardigan was replaced by a dark navy coat, old but pressed flat at every seam. On the lapel, no badge, no ribbon bar, only a single button polished smooth by time. As she entered the hall, she did not lift her head immediately. But the moment the door closed behind her, she heard something she had not heard anywhere since the day she came back from Fallujah. The silence of reverence. The room was crowded, every row of seats filled. All of them stood when she appeared. No one spoke. No one clapped. They simply stood, as a ritual, as an unvoiced salute. At the center was a plain wooden table. Upon it, a wooden box had been placed with care. Not large, not glittering, but engraved on the lid was the United States Navy insignia, lines so finely cut, so familiar, that her heart sank. She knew at once this was not a symbolic prop. An officer in full-dress uniform stepped to the podium. No introduction of himself, no biography reading. He only looked toward her and began in a low voice. There are feats absent from the record. Not because they were not great enough, but because they belong to conscience and courage. Not every hero is roll-called. But today, we return a truth. Late, but not forever too late. He opened the lid. Inside lay a replica Medal of Honor, the highest decoration of the United States military. Under the dim lights, the face of the medal reflected a pale silver. like moonlight on a name abandoned for 2 decades. Beside it was a small plaque engraved Eleanor Monroe, Echo Juliet 12, Fallujah, Iraq, 2004. She did not shed tears at once, but her breath hitched, as though her lungs had just opened into a space compressed for far too long. No one stepped up to place it in her hands, no elaborate ritual. They simply set the box before her, as if to say, "We need no further words. Your presence suffices." She stepped forward. Her hand lifted the box lightly. The hands that once cradled life and death on a battlefield now lifted something emblematic of what had never been spoken. She stood straight, shoulders steady. Only her eyes betrayed what could not be hidden. She raised her hand in salute, a regulation military salute, slow, decisive, unadorned, without excess. In the front row, a little boy looked up, tugged his father's sleeve, whispering uncertainly, "Is she a real superhero, Dad?" The father only set his hand on the child's shoulder, not answering. But his gaze toward Ellie spoke for everything. In that moment, the room seemed filled with a light that did not come from electrical fixtures. It was the light of acknowledgement, not because of a medal, but because something had been restored to its rightful place. Ellie needed no praise, needed no dais. She only needed someone to still remember. Because sometimes, the most noble thing is not to be rewarded, but to be affirmed that you were there. Dear audience, take a short break or grab a glass of water, then keep listening. The developments ahead, I thought, are even more surprising. Comment the number 1 if you think the story is good, so we know you are still here. They did not erect a statue, did not inaugurate with fanfare. They simply, quietly, renamed a small corner on the east side of the library. Echo Juliet Memorial. On the nameplate there was no flashy logo, only an engraved line and a short sentence below. For those who remain must not be forgotten. In the display case was the dark brown leather journal, open to the page with the Psalm 91 line handwritten in blue ink. The paper's edge curled slightly, the left corner still bearing a stain like the imprint of time. Beside it lay an old pair of medical gloves, coarse fabric, with a bit of blood turned deep brown. No one knows whose. Perhaps the rescued. Perhaps the rescuer. Each stain is a slice of truth no military report ever recorded. Behind the glass, a photograph of Bravo 27. 18 people standing on red, dusty ground, faces both exhausted and surviving. No one smiling. No one bowed. The photo does not note who took it, but among them, 15 had once been pulled from the line of fire by an unnamed nurse. The other 3 never came home. No one spoke of Ellie as a hero. No one called her a historical witness. She did not need that. After the honoring, Ellie still came to the library each week, sat quietly at the old wooden table, placed her hand on the journal in the case, sometimes as if to keep it settled, sometimes as if listening to something issuing from within. Then one day, the local school's civic character curriculum proposed, invite real people to speak about courage. They phoned the library. The manager did not hesitate to mention the name Mrs. Monroe. The first time standing before the students, Ellie did not bring the notebook. No props, no projection. She did not speak about Fallujah, nor mention herself. She told of the private, who only had time to hand her a smudged letter to his mother, asking that if she didn't make it in time, she tuck it into his pocket. Of a young sergeant who said he would apologize to his wife if he survived, but did not. Of the last soldier who called her Sis in a delirious moment, though Ellie was then nearly his mother's age. After each story, she paused for a long while, not to summon emotion, but as though waiting for their names to settle with due solemnity. No one asked for more details. No one demanded photos or proof. The kids fell silent. They understood in a way textbooks do not teach. Gradually, Ellie became a familiar presence at the sharing sessions, but she never spoke about the medal, never spoke about herself. "I want to become someone who saves people like you," a seventh-grade girl once said. Ellie only smiled. "I didn't save them to get anything back. I saved them because they would have done the same for me." Those words were not a philosophy, just a simple truth running through each life or death decision on the battlefield. Now it has become a legacy. Echo Juliet Memorial is not merely a small corner storing artifacts. It is the starting point for hundreds of unvoiced dialogues between old and young, between war and peace, between memory and the present. Not everyone knows who Ellie is when they walk past, but sometimes a student will stop, look at the photo, then turn to a friend and softly ask, "Is it true one person did all that without needing to be named?" That question needs no answer, because silence is sometimes the voice that carries farthest. For there are small corners which, when lit by courage, become places where people learn to remember the most important thing: to live not to be honored, but to not abandon one another. It was an early spring afternoon, the air not yet truly warm, but sunlight already edging its way across each library window pane. Ellie was re-shelving books on military medical history when the young librarian brought an envelope. No sender's name, no address, just a brown envelope, slightly creased, carrying the smell of long-stored paper dust. She opened it at her familiar corner table. Inside was a black-and-white photograph, its old border slightly torn. The shot was taken from above, perhaps from a helicopter cockpit or a temporary observation post. In it, chaotic scene, a smoke-covered street, a few bodies lying motionless, and in the center a nurse pulling a litter along the line between life and death. The person wore protective gear, a mask, a hood drawn tight. The face was nearly impossible to see. But there was one detail Ellie could not mistake: the way that figure dipped the head and angled the shoulder while pushing the litter wheel around a bend and the hand gripping the rescue knife. Exactly the style she had once been trained in, and later, a habit she could never unlearn. Ellie touched the photograph lightly, as though touching time again. Wind at the window stirred one corner of the paper. Clipped to the photo was a small slip, folded in 4, handwritten in black ink. "You saved me that year. I never said thank you. Now I am a military trauma surgeon." I teach students about courage, the kind not in any syllabus. LT, Bravo, Tutor said the handwriting was even, clear, not showy. Yet each stroke seemed to brush a region of memory she had thought had settled. LT. The initials did not instantly call up a face, but something felt familiar. Perhaps the private she had dragged from a collapsed concrete heap on the third night, the one wounded in the leg, who was still calling Mom as blood poured out. Or the young soldier who always carried a small Bible in his breast pocket, who once looked at her, panicked, and asked, "Do I still have time?" She would never be certain, but she knew one thing. Someone had lived, and now that person was saving others. Ellie tightened her grip slightly on the slip, not from emotion, but as if wanting to keep the line of ink from blowing away. She had once believed everything she had done would be buried, like hundreds of other unnamed deeds. But this note, brief, unadorned, was evidence that something had continued, not through retelling, through action. Not everyone needs to know who she is, but one life now saving further lives. Perhaps that is more than any decoration. A faint smile traced her face, not out of pride, more like late-day sunlight after a long winter. Not loud, not hurried, but enough to warm what seemed extinguished. That thank you did not arrive early, but it arrived. And perhaps what matters is not what people say to you, but what remains in them, because of you. Ellie refolded the note, placed it between the journal pages that had long ago come to rest. She wrote nothing more, simply left it there, like a silent period to a story once written in blood, trembling hands, and the belief that good things, though forgotten, will find their way back. Because there are promises that never need to be spoken, yet remain intact. And there are things left unsaid, that sometimes are what make people live more kindly. Sometimes, old journal pages tell stories all of history once forgot. And sometimes, a quiet woman like Ellie Monroe carries a whole legacy unseen, until a photograph, a thank you, awakens the gratitude an entire generation still owes. Ellie's story is not only about war or courage. It is a reminder that honor does not reside in medals, but in the choice to go on living decently, even when no one sees. Each person bears a scar. But if we are willing to listen, those scars can become the guiding story for others. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment about a veteran you have known or admired. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that there are silent heroes still living among us every day. You are watching Veteran Best Stories. Thank you for listening.